Prince William just executed the most ruthless takedown of Camilla's family the monarchy has ever seen. And the whole thing was set off by someone making his youngest son cry. We are talking about a vicious, calculated attack on a 7-year-old boy, so brutal that staff who witnessed it called the words shockingly cruel. And when William found out, he did something nobody in that family has ever dared to do before him. The sound that broke the Highlands. Louis's scream tore through Balmoral Castle and froze everyone who heard it. This was not a scraped knee or a small tantrum. This was a 7-year-old boy music completely shattered by words that were never meant for a child to hear. It started as an ordinary afternoon after a formal family lunch. The adults drifted away to talk among themselves, leaving the children to run around the grounds unsupervised. Nobody thought twice about it. Why would they? These were family gatherings, the kind that had happened 100 times before without incident. The estate itself sits deep inside the Scottish Highlands, surrounded by hills and open fields, the kind of quiet, private setting the family always used to escape the cameras and the noise of the outside world. It was supposed to be safe there. It was supposed to be the one place these children could just be children without anyone watching or judging them. The estate had been in the family for generations. Music, and every summer, the same routine played out. The older relatives would gather in the drawing room after lunch, trading updates about their lives, while the younger ones wandered off toward the gardens or the stables. Nannies usually kept a loose eye on things. But on this particular afternoon, most of them had been pulled aside to help prepare for an evening reception, leaving a gap in supervision that normally would have meant nothing at all. Royal children had run free on these grounds for decades without a single serious incident. That is exactly why nobody could have predicted what was coming. The children that day included Prince George and Princess Charlotte, too. Both older than Lizzie, and both off exploring a different part of the grounds when it happened, which meant Louis was completely alone when Camilla's granddaughter, Lola Parker B.S., approached Musicum. Lola looked at Louis with a coldness that had nothing playful in it, and what she said next would haunt this family for years to come. She spat out that he was a crybaby, just like his mother and just like his grandmother before her. And that was just the beginning. Lola said the women in his family had turned tears into a weapon, that they knew exactly how to fake pain and squeeze sympathy out of anyone watching. Like that wasn't already cruel enough for her liking. Lola then bluntly told Louis that nobody ever really wanted him in the first place, that he was just a spare child like his miserable uncle. To make matters even worse, Lola said all these with the flat certainty of someone reciting a fact everyone already agreed on, not the wild guess of a child making up an insult on the spot. And that right there should stop you cold. Because where does a young girl learn to attack 2 generations of women in a single sentence? Where does she pick up language that precise, music that calculated, that clearly built a wound? Children do not invent cruelty like that out of thin air. They copy it. Somewhere behind closed doors, adults had been tearing into Princesses Catherine and Diana, and Lola had been standing close enough to catch every single word. This was not one careless comment overheard by accident. This was a worldview passed down and practiced until it became second nature. Louis did not understand the history buried inside Lola's words. He was too young to know who Diana really was or why her name carried so much weight. But he understood the venom behind the attack, and that alone was enough to break him completely. So Louis ran to his mother, sobbing, with his whole body shaking so hard he could barely breathe. And for a moment, the entire estate went dead silent, except for the sound of a child falling apart. But here is the twist nobody saw coming. It wasn't Louise's tears that froze the staff in place. It was Catherine's face. She did not scream. She did not storm across the lawn demanding answers. Instead, her expression turned cold and locked. One witness, even later, said what scared them most was not that Catherine felt nothing. It was obvious she felt everything, and she was holding it back with an iron grip that could snap at any second. Because Lola's words had not just wounded Lousy, they had reached straight through time and struck Diana, too. A woman no longer here to defend her own name. Staff later admitted this was not even the first time something like this had happened. Smaller jabs from Camilla's side of the family had slipped through before, brushed off quietly so nobody had to make a scene. Some staff even recalled a specific gathering months earlier where a similar remark had slipped out during a formal dinner, then quickly smoothed over with laughter before anyone could dwell on it. Nobody wanted to be the person who made things awkward at a family event. So the comment passed without consequence, filed away as nothing more than an unfortunate joke. A comment here about how the whale's children were being raised too soft. A sly remark there about Catherine seeking attention with her charity work. Each one was small enough to ignore on its own, but they were stacking up quietly in the background like a debt nobody was paying attention to. One former staff member later described it as watching a slow drip erode stone. Music. And that is exactly how this kind of poison survives inside a family like this one. It does not announce itself. Music. It hides behind polite smiles and dinner table small talk until it finally breaks through in a moment nobody can pretend not to notice. But this time the cruelty was too loud, too calculated, and far too public to bury. And if you know Diana's story, then you already know exactly why this cut so deep. She spent years insisting her pain was real, only to be mocked by people inside this very family who called her too emotional and too dramatic. Now here it was again, decades later, aimed.
The conversation behind closed doors. That night, Catherine walked into the room where William was waiting, and what came next was not a quiet, music, talk between two tired parents. This was a reckoning that had been building for years, and it finally exploded into the open. Catherine had waited until the children were settled, and the house had gone quiet before she brought it up. Not because she needed time to calm down, but because she wanted every word she said to land with full, music weight, without interruption, and without anyone else in the room to soften the blow. But Catherine did not lead with Louis. She led with Diana. "You know exactly what they did to your mother," she told William with her voice steady and unflinching. "They isolated her. They mocked her pain until she had nobody left to turn to. Music, and today they did it again to your son." William sat frozen as Catherine laid out the truth with a directness that gave him nowhere to hide. This family had failed Diana, not just through the media circus that hounded her every move, but through something far crueler. They had shut her out from the inside, made her feel like an outsider in her own home, and left her to carry that pain completely alone. Catherine reminded William, too, of the quieter details, music, the ones rarely spoken about openly. How Diana had once tried to raise concerns about her treatment within the family and been told in so many words that she was imagining things or exaggerating for attention. How the people meant to guide and protect her instead treated her instincts as a problem to be managed rather than a warning worth taking seriously. Catherine was not simply recounting history for the sake of it. She was building a case methodically, the way someone lays out evidence when they already know the verdict they want. Then Catherine said the words that changed everything. She looked her husband dead in the eye and told him she would not let history repeat itself. Not with George, not with Charlotte, and absolutely not with Louis. Now, here's what makes this moment hit so hard. William had buried something as a boy, a memory of overhearing something vicious said about his own mother by someone inside the family circle. He never told a soul, not even Catherine, until that very night when her words ripped the memory straight back into the light. William had spent decades convincing himself that memory did not matter anymore, that it was just a childhood scar he had long since outgrown. But some wounds do not heal quietly. They just wait for the right moment to reopen. So, he admitted to Catherine in a voice barely above a whisper that he had spent years telling himself it did not matter, that children misheard things all the time, that surely he had exaggerated the cruelty of what he overheard as a boy. But sitting there that night watching his own son's tear-streaked face replay in his mind, William understood for the first time that he had not exaggerated anything at all. He had simply been too afraid to believe it. William's hand stayed still on the table in front of him the entire time Catherine spoke, though his jaw tightened more than once, and that was the only outward sign of what was happening underneath his composed exterior. He had built a career out of appearing measured in public. But that night, in private, The mask came dangerously, music, close to slipping entirely, and Catherine was not finished yet. She reminded William of a promise he made to himself as a grieving teenager, a silent vow that if he ever held real power, he would use it to stop this kind of cruelty from touching anyone he loved again. This was not just Catherine asking her husband to protect their son. This was her calling in a debt he owed to the boy he used to be. So when Kensington Palace woke up different the next morning, it was not sudden at all. It had been building for years, just waiting for a spark, and staff noticed the shift immediately. Nobody looked afraid exactly, but a sharp, focused energy moved through the halls that had never been there before. Senior aides were pulled into closed-door meetings without warning, and certain corridors were suddenly off-limits. Even longtime employees who had weathered every royal scandal for decades said they had never felt anything quite like the mood inside those walls that morning. Music breakfast that morning went untouched in more than one household office. Assistants who normally spent the first hour of their day scrolling through headlines and flagging press concerns instead found themselves rerouted into hallway conversations that ended the moment anyone unfamiliar walked past. Even the household's usual rhythm, the comings and goings of couriers and scheduling calls had been quietly paused, replaced by something far more contained and far more deliberate. Word of the closed-door meeting spread through Kensington in whispers long before anyone officially confirmed what was even happening. Junior staff exchanged glances in hallways, unsure whether to ask questions or simply keep their heads down and wait for instructions, sensing correctly that whatever was unfolding behind those doors was not something anyone wanted to be caught gossiping about. This didn't seem like a mere plan for damage control. It felt more like a preparation for war. Legal advisors arrived quietly. So did constitutional experts and senior protocol officials brought in under total secrecy. And when William finally stepped into that meeting room, he did not look like a heartbroken father trying to process what happened to his son. He looked like a commander-in-chief walking in with a battle plan already locked and loaded, like he had been waiting years for this exact moment to strike. Because, make no mistake, everything that followed next was calculated to the bone. Music. And by the time those doors swung open again, the empire Camilla had spent 20 years quietly building inside the royal family would lay in ruins. The directive, the order William gave his entire staff during that meeting was ruthless. Every single privilege Camilla's extended family had spent decades collecting was to be ripped away in one single stroke. All balcony appearances by Camilla's family during royal occasions were to be cancelled, as well as invitations to state banquets. Even their honorary titles and symbolic roles built up over years of careful maneuvering were wiped out completely. But what happened next inside that palace was bigger than one father protecting one son, and bigger than one grandmother losing her family's place at the table. It was the first real sign of what the monarchy itself was about to become once the crown finally passed to William. Music, and nobody inside those walls could pretend otherwise anymore. 2 courts, 1 crown. Charles's refusal to fight back was not a small thing. Everyone inside that palace understood exactly what his silence meant. William had won, and not just this one battle. The entire balance of power inside the monarchy had shifted for good. 2 separate courts began forming almost overnight. The old guard stayed clustered around Charles and Camilla at Buckingham Palace, holding on to tradition with white knuckles, while a new, sharper, and far more guarded court rose up around William and Catherine at Kensington Palace. But what about staff loyalty? It shifted quietly but unmistakably as everyone scrambled to figure out where the real power now lived. Junior aides who once split their time evenly between both households suddenly found themselves being asked, without anyone saying it directly, to pick a side. Even something as small as seating arrangements at future family gatherings became a quiet battlefield, with organizers privately unsure which side of the family to prioritize without causing offense. Long-standing traditions that had never needed a second thought before were suddenly loaded with meaning. Every decision scrutinized for what it might signal about where loyalty truly stood. As for Princess Anne, she was not just whispering caution from the sidelines. She stood shoulder to shoulder with William fully and completely. "Someone should have done this for your mother," she reportedly once told him, gripping his arm. "I watched them tear her apart, and I said nothing. Music, I will not make that mistake twice." for years, and had been one of the only people in this entire family who stayed, music, genuinely close to Diana through her darkest, loneliest years. She had watched from the inside as the family closed ranks against her, and she had carried the music guilt of her own silence for decades. So, this was not just about protecting Louis for her. This was about a debt she had carried in silence for decades, and she was finally getting the chance to repay it through her nephew. And reportedly spent hours with William in the days following the directive, not to talk him out of anything, but to help him think through how to hold the line if Camilla or anyone close to her tried to chip away at it later. And had seen firsthand how quickly resolve could crumble inside this family once enough pressure was applied. And she was determined not to let that happen again. Not this time. Not with a child's well-being on the line. Some longtime supporters of the monarchy expressed unease at how quickly and completely the change had taken hold. Worried that a family built on decades of careful balance now, music, risked looking as though it could be reshaped entirely by one man's decision made in a single private conversation. Others argued the opposite, insisting this was exactly the kind of decisive leadership the institution had been missing for years. A willingness to draw hard lines where previous generations had chosen quiet avoidance instead, even when avoidance meant leaving the people most vulnerable without real protection. And once word of the silent rift leaked to the public, the internet exploded. Old photographs of Diana resurfaced everywhere, especially the ones showing her fiercely shielding her young sons from the crush of cameras all those years ago. People were not just getting nostalgic. Longtime royal watchers pointed out something bigger and darker. Diana had once said publicly, music, that she feared her children would grow up trapped inside the very same machine that crushed her. So, ask yourself this. Did William just protect his son? Or did he finally break a curse his mother spent her whole life warning him about? Royal commentators who had covered this family for decades said they could not remember a moment that captured public sentiment so completely, and so, music, quickly. Petitions calling for the family to formally apologize for how the Windsor incident was allowed to happen gathered momentum online. Even though no formal apology from anyone was ever issued or expected, it became less about demanding an official statement and more about people simply wanting to be heard, wanting to say publicly that what happened to Louis mattered. Either way, the public conversation had shifted permanently. Nobody was debating whether William had overreacted anymore. The debate had moved on entirely to what kind of monarchy this decision was quietly building, one silence from Charles at a time. The directive never got softened. It never got reversed. Nobody inside that palace dared challenge it again. The message rang out loud and clear, without a single public speech ever needed. In the future reign of King William, his children's safety would outweigh tradition, outweigh politics, and outweigh centuries of royal hierarchy stacked against him. He never had to say a word out loud. His actions already screamed everything that needed to be said. And after everything that happened at Balmoral, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was not just a father protecting his son. This was the opening shot of exactly what kind of king he intends to become. Whatever comes next for this family, one thing seems certain. The quiet, careful balance that once held everyone together, blood relatives and step relatives alike, has music been permanently broken. And the version of the monarchy now taking shape looks far less like the sprawling, inclusive vision Charles once championed. Music and far